Good afternoon. Buenos dias.
Good afternoon, Madrid.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, commanders, ladies and gentlemen, Ukrainian friends, and the friends around the world. Many thanks for joining us today and joining us tomorrow, hopefully, at the only public part of this historical NATO summit in Madrid. A big thank you to the Spanish government and to our 4 think tank partners for creating this public event where we can openly discuss and align our thinking not only about the today but about the tomorrow of our Euro-Atlantic space. Our leaders are meeting in Madrid at a pivotal time for our security. In 2010, NATO's strategic concept said that Euro-Atlantic area is at peace. Now, that is not the case. Russia's attack against Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe. Lives are lost, and peace is no more. It has caused food crisis. It has caused energy crisis. It affects everyone on our continent and beyond. The rules-based international order is under threat. So we as NATO, as the alliance of 30 countries, have taken decisions that are within our remit. And our leaders tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will affirm the alliance as the only transatlantic platform of cooperation on security and defense, where we jointly make the decisions how to deter and defend if necessary, but also how to adapt for the future in this more dangerous world. The heads of state and government will agree to strengthen deterrence and defense of the alliance and will affirm their support for Ukraine for the long term. They will agree the 2022 strategic concept, which will be the basis for the alliance's strategy in the years to come. Allies will boost cooperation with partners, enhance resilience, and sharpen NATO's technological edge, all underpinned by the necessary investments and by resourcing the alliance properly. In this critical juncture for our defense and security, and looking ahead at the long-term challenges, we have created this high-level dialogue today, this segment where we will look what the alliance and leaders and partners can do for the future generations, how the climate change affects us, and what decisions are taken. The Secretary General and His Majesty, the King of Spain, Felipe VI, will speak about it, and we will have a ministerial roundtable following it. Well, tomorrow we will look at all the other issues on the Alliance's agenda. Once again, I would like to thank our 4 think tank partners, the Royal Elcano Institute, the Atlantic Council, the German Marshall Fund, and the Munich Security Conference for the excellent cooperation. And I'm very welcome to see the best experts, top minds, because we need to align not only our leaders' thinking, but we also need to get your views, to know what our experts and publics are thinking and what contributions they have. With this, I would like to conclude this introductory part and give the floor to the President of the Royal Elcano Institute, Jose Juan Ruiz Gomez. Sir, you have the floor.
Deputy General Secretary, Ambassador Brace, dear Beba, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Let me first of all welcome you to this forum on behalf of the El Real Instituto Elcano, one of the 4 co-organizers of this important event. Let me begin by thanking Ambassador Brace and her team at NATO for their trust and cooperation, and our 3 partners, the Atlantic Council, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and the Munich Security Conference, for an excellent collaboration. It has been a pleasure and a privilege working with each and every one of you. And let me, of course, thank all our speakers, moderators, and participants for your commitment, and to thank Elcano's team for the tireless effort during these months. We have an exciting program ahead of us. Over the next 1.5 days, key decision makers, experts, and representatives from civil society will gather to discuss freely the key challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for us in our alliance. And I emphasize freely, this is what brings us together as an alliance: our commitment to freedom and democracy, our shared values and principles, which are currently under assault as we all witness the unprovoked and illegal war that is being waged by Russia against Ukraine. Our thoughts are, of course, with that brave country, with their people and leaders. I am sure all of you have heard countless times by now that NATO summit in Madrid is a historic one, and it is. First and foremost, it is a historic summit because it takes place under the shadow of war in Europe. But it is also a historic summit because it will lead to the adoption of a new strategic concept, and not just any strategic concept, a strategic concept that aims to adapt our alliance for a world dominated by the return of strategic competition. As our leaders meet here in Madrid to discuss how to navigate an increasingly challenging and complex world, it is our duty to continue to test new ideas and exchange perspectives on how to tackle the many challenges our alliance face. Hence the importance of initiatives like this forum, and the importance of free and dynamic civil societies. That is our edge, and we must cherish it. So I would like to thank you all again for your commitment and collaboration, and I hope you will enjoy the forum and your stay in our wonderful city, Madrid. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, welcome to the NATO Public Forum. I'm very excited to welcome His Excellency, the Secretary General of NATO, to the podium.
Thank you so much, Hadley, and Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's really great to see you all, and it's great to be here today, just before we start the NATO summit. At this summit, we will address all the issues that affect our security. Russia's war in Ukraine, cyber, terrorism, disruptive technologies, and many other threats and challenges. But we also know that climate change poses a serious risk to us all. So therefore, I'm very pleased to be with you today at the first high-level dialogue on climate change and security, bringing together NATO allies with partner nations and other stakeholders from around the world. And I thank you all for being here today. From the high north to the Sahel, climate change is a crisis multiplier. More extreme weather devastates communities and fuels tensions and conflicts. Climate change matters for our security, so it matters for NATO. That is why NATO is determined to set the gold standard on addressing the security implications of climate change. Here in Madrid, leaders will endorse a new strategic concept, the Madrid Strategic Concept. It will state that climate change is a defining challenge of our time. For NATO, this means three things: increasing our understanding, adapting our alliance, and reducing our own emissions. First, increasing our understanding. Today, I am releasing our first ever assessment of how climate change affects our security. Our military assets, installations and activities, as well as our resilience and civilian preparedness. Climate change deeply affects the environment in which our women and men operate. From extreme heat in our training missions in Iraq to melting ice in the Arctic. And from rising sea levels and storms that threaten our naval bases to the hurricanes that disable our airfields. The list is long. There are many ways climate change affects our security. So second, we must adapt, providing our armed forces with the equipment they need to operate in extreme heat and extreme cold. Training them to assist in disaster relief, reinforcing our coastal facilities against rising water levels, and addressing the security implications of more economic and military activity in the high north. We have identified the initial steps in our adaptation. We now take account of climate change when planning our operations and our missions, and when developing new capabilities. This way, we make sure we remain effective in increasingly harsh environments. And third, we must reduce the impact of our military activities on the climate. We cannot compromise our military effectiveness. NATO is about preserving peace through a credible deterrence and defense. Nothing is more important. If we fail to preserve peace, we will also fail to fight climate change. At the same time, we also have a responsibility to reduce emissions. To this end, we have developed the first methodology for measuring NATO's greenhouse gas emissions, civilian and military. It sets out what to count and how to count it. and it will be made available to all allies to help them reduce their own military emissions. This is vital because what gets measured can get cut. Based on this new methodology, I can announce today the first emission targets for NATO as an organization. By 2030, we will reduce emissions by at least 45%, reducing to net zero by 2050. We have conducted thorough analysis of how to do this. It will not be easy, but it can be done. A big part of this will be our transition away from fossil fuels. All allies are committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions as part of the Paris Agreement. Adapting their militaries will contribute to this, including more green tech such as renewables, climate-friendly synthetic fuels, and more energy-efficient solutions. There is a technological revolution happening right now, a green energy revolution, one that can be of huge benefit for our militaries. Already today, the best new cars are actual electric cars. And I believe that in the future, the most advanced military vehicles and the most resilient armed forces will be those that do not rely on fossil fuels. By making our equipment more efficient and by taking full advantage of new technologies, we can improve our militaries and strengthen our security, as well as help tackle climate change. It will also increase our resilience. The war in Ukraine shows the danger of being too dependent on commodities from authoritarian regimes. The way Russia is using energy as a weapon of coercion highlights the need to quickly wean off Russian oil and gas. At the same time, we must not swap one dependency for another. Lots of new green technologies and the rare earth minerals they require come from China. So we must diversify our energy sources and our suppliers. Another risk is creating a patchwork of incompatible systems, where all 30 NATO allies follow their own separate path towards energy security and adoption of new technologies. This would present serious risks to our interoperability. Instead, we should work together to ensure that national policies enhance our collective military strength, and NATO is the ideal platform for allies to coordinate our efforts. By setting shared benchmarks and standards, we can innovate together while maintaining our operational effectiveness. So therefore, I will ask NATO civilian and military authorities to develop a new energy transition by design initiative and present it at the next high-level dialogue meeting next year. These high-level meetings will be held annually, establishing NATO as the nexus between climate and security. Climate change is not a threat that exists far beyond the horizon or long into the future. We see its impact on our security right now. We now have a plan with concrete actions to address the security risks of climate change, to ensure our alliance adapts to the new challenges, and to protect NATO's 1 billion citizens. Thank you so much.
Secretary General, once again, welcome, and thank you so much for those remarks. It's fantastic to be here with you all today. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am the senior correspondent for CNBC News, covering politics and energy markets and how often they come together. Secretary General, in those remarks, essentially you were saying that energy security equals national security. It's a conversation that we've been having again and again, the two of us, for a long time now, even prior to the invasion of Ukraine. You mentioned that working together between NATO allies is essential in terms of tackling climate change, in terms of coordinating efforts. I want to float something with you. Over the last several days, we've heard the idea of an oil cap floated amongst G7 members, what that might look like. When you think about that a little bit more broadly, could NATO lead that conversation? Because essentially you've got to negotiate with the rest of the world here. And a lot of the rest of the world blames the West and blames NATO for inflation, high energy prices, and the idea that we could at some point in the near future be talking about a food scarcity problem that could eventually lead to famine. So in terms of that oil cap, how do you think that that's actually going to get done, and will NATO lead the way?
So first of all, I think that you now mentioned many challenges, and we have to understand that all of those challenges are related to the war in Ukraine, which is a brutal war of aggression by President Putin against the independent sovereign nation in Europe. The reason for the consequences which impact global energy markets, global food markets, the responsibility for that is President Putin. I mean, you have to understand that it's not the easiest way to end all these problems is just to end the war and for President Putin to withdraw his forces and end attacking a sovereign independent nation. Then I think we also have to remember that the reason why we have the challenges with, for instance, food prices and the problems of getting grain out to Ukraine is not because of our economic sanctions. There are no sanctions from NATO allies against exports of grain. So the reason why it's hard to get grain out of Ukraine, food out of Ukraine, is the war, is the Russian blockade. Then I, of course, recognize that our economic sanctions, for instance, on parts of Russian industry, on the financial sectors, also have global ramification, also for the energy markets. And therefore Europeans, NATO allies, the United States partners, they pay a price. There is no way to deny that. But that price is much lower than the price we'll pay if Putin gets his way by using military force against an independent nation. It's about the price we have to pay for freedom, for upholding a rules-based international order, and ensure that the lesson President Putin learns from this war is that he will be rewarded by using this kind of brutal military force. So I'm not in any way suggesting that there is zero consequences for us economically as a NATO allies and partners by the sanctions we are imposing on Russia. But I'm saying that the most severe are direct consequences of the war itself, grain, and second, that the fact that we are paying a price is actually a price is worth paying to support the brave Ukrainian people in upholding the right for self-defense. Then on that specific issue of oil cap, well, the message from this high-level meeting and also in the assessment I delivered today was to look at the direct link between military activities, climate change and our security. And therefore NATO will not be the forum to address something which is more directly related to the economic consequences of higher oil prices. So I would leave it to and I think it's also good that the G7 and all the allies are engaging in those issues. We will focus on climate change and of course all the other core tasks of NATO, but the discussions on how to, what should I say, deal with the high energy prices, I think there are other platforms that are more suited for that than NATO.
Secretary General, just as a follow-on to that, you mentioned in your comments authoritarian regimes. Were you referring to China, Russia, and perhaps OPEC members like Saudi Arabia and the UAE?
So I referred to the fact that I have always believed in free trade. I still believe in free trade. I think that free trade actually fuels prosperity, growth. It's good for our economies, and division of labor has been key for economic development over centuries. At the same time, I think we need to realize that too heavy dependence on some specific commodities can create vulnerabilities for our free and open societies. And therefore, it's not as if free trade always promotes freedom. Actually, sometimes we have to be careful. And one example is too heavy dependence on gas from Russia. That was not obvious for everyone before Ukraine, but now it's obvious for everyone that the high dependence by European allies on imports of gas from Russia has made them vulnerable in a way they should never have been in the situation we are now with the brutal invasion of Ukraine. Second, I also believe that, of course, we should trade with China. China is the biggest, soon the biggest economy in the world. Trade with China has been important for many of our companies for prosperity, will be it also in the future. But we have to be aware of the same risks of too heavy dependence, for instance, on some rare earth minerals, which are key for many different technologies, including green technologies. We have to be aware of the risk of China controlling critical infrastructure. Not so many years ago, 2-3 years ago, it was a big discussion whether we should be concerned about Chinese control of 5G networks. Now I think everyone realizes that that is something that matters for our security. So we should not, in a way, in the shadow of the idea of free trade, open up and make our infrastructure vulnerable to Chinese control when we, for instance, speak about 5G networks. And then lastly, we should also realize the danger of too much what I would call naive free trade, if that leads to that we are sharing key technologies we are developing with authoritarian powers. So I'm not against trading with authoritarian countries. That will be the case, has been and will be the case in the future. But we need to be aware of the risks, the vulnerabilities, and therefore the work we now do in NATO to improve resilience, to increase awareness of these issues, and then in dialogue with allies in different ways, also ensure that we continue to be in favor of free trade, but we also have to have some limits and some guidelines on how to not create new vulnerabilities, as we have seen, for instance, with too high dependence on imports of Russian gas.
Secretary General, when you think about this within the context of the current situation with regards to climate change and the energy transition, I just want to read you a couple of comments that we've heard in recent days, as quoted to CNBC. The CEO of Exxon discussing the current energy situation and saying that society is going to pay a very high price if governments and industries abandon fossil fuels too soon. The CEO of BP essentially saying that the world needs to back those who deliver the energy that the world needs today as well as tomorrow. When you think about that within the context of where we are now, there is deep concern that consumers across the West and elsewhere are going to basically face a cost of living crisis in the coming months as a direct result of the situation that we're seeing today in Ukraine. What is your message to the oil and gas community at this point? Are you willing, as NATO allies, to work with them through this transition? Should we be investing more money now, and not just renewables, but also fossil fuels today?
So first of all, many NATO allies are, of course, working very closely with the industry, also the energy industry, and also those parts of the energy industry that are investing in fossil fuels. And what we see is that many of these companies, they're actually now also key in the transition away from fossil fuels. So I think a lot of the technology, the capital, the competence these companies have will be key for the transition away from fossil fuel.
So demonizing them isn't the way forward?
No, that's never the answer. But because the issue is that the question is not whether we have to move away from fossil fuels. There's no way we can achieve the goals we have set to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, either by moving away from fossil fuels and or by developing technologies for carbon capture. And I think we have to do both. Then, of course, the high prices we see now, they are a big problem for ordinary households throughout the world. And again, poor people are more vulnerable than rich people because they are more able to pay for higher energy prices. Those who don't have so much, for them this is really, really a serious problem. I think the answer is to increase supply. And of course, what we have seen is that the high prices on oil and gas and also the cut in supply has to some extent led to that some countries are moving back to coal. That is bad for climate, but of course it reflects the desperate situation they are in. Hopefully, and I think that also will happen and is happening, and that is that increased prices on oil and gas will also then incentivize investments in also more energy-efficient solutions, because you can reduce emissions just by finding more energy-efficient solutions, even though you continue to use different types of fossil fuels, by investing in new types of energy, everything from biofuels to clean scientific fuels, to also hydrogen and other green and clean energy sources. And then I am a man that believes in the idea of carbon capture. We have seen several big projects, and I think that with increasing carbon prices and increasing awareness of the need to reduce carbon emissions, there will be big carbon capture projects that will help us to provide both energy and reduce emissions at the same time.
You mentioned the backlash there. It's something that the UN Secretary General has also talked about, the risk of backlash because of the higher living costs. Essentially, power prices could take 3 to 5 years to fall back to lower levels, according to the CEO of Germany's largest power producer. There's a lot of speculation at this point about at a time in the near future, potentially as we move into the winter months, that you're going to lose the support of the public. What is NATO's strategy to ensure that that doesn't happen?
To convey how important this fight is, and to convey how important it is that we support Ukraine. Of course, there's no way to deny that we pay a price, as I said. But you have to remember that by far the highest price is paid by the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian armed forces. They're actually fighting every day. We see casualties, we see attacks on cities, on civilian infrastructure, on hospitals, on schools. So of course, I recognize that also people in NATO allied countries and partners see the consequences of the war because of higher energy prices, and I share those concerns, and as political leaders throughout the alliance, they are addressing that in different ways. But that's a very different situation than the situation people experiences in Ukraine, where they actually are killed and where we see atrocities and where people are afraid of their lives. So we have to put things in perspective. Second, and this is about a kind of moral and political obligation to Ukraine. But second, it is in our interest to support Ukraine. We support Ukraine partly because they are a close partner. We have worked with them for many years. But also because it will be our world, the world of NATO allies, will be more insecure if Putin wins this war. So it's in our security interest to make sure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation, and therefore we need to provide support as long as it takes, and the option has a much higher price than to pay price now to ensure that Ukraine prevails.
Secretary General, walk us through how this looks from a hardware perspective. Are we going to see electric F-35s? I mean, where are we today in those types of prototypes? Also,
I'm very careful predicting exactly what kind of electric vehicles or whatever. It may be not electric, it may be hydrogen, there may be fuel cells. There are different types of energy solutions. I will not be specific exactly on what will be the winning technology. What we see now, at least when it comes to vehicles, cars, is that electric is really on the offensive. It may be other technologies for more heavy vehicles, for instance, hydrogen. The experts have different views. I think the most important we can do is to support research, development, and price emissions. Because if we support the development of new technologies, if we put the price on carbon emission, it will become profitable to develop clean technologies. And then actually we'll leave to the industry to innovate and to find out exactly what is the best solution to the specific task, either to move big battleships or to move small cars or whatever that is. That's not for politicians, but that's for the industry to decide, and then offer those solutions to the military. What I'm absolutely certain about is that if there is a technological revolution taking place in the civilian sector, which is now the case, with less and less dependence on fossil fuels and more new green technologies for all energy solutions in the civilian sector, from electric cars to carbon capture to fuel cells to hydrogen in the civilian sector. It will not be good for the military if we end up as the only fossil fuel sector left in the world some decades from now. That will weaken our military capabilities. So if we want to maintain the technological edge and have the best cars, the best planes, the best technologies, then we need to be green. Not only because we care about climate change, but because we care about having the best technologies in our armed forces. So in the short run, there may be a contradiction between green and military effectiveness. In the long run, green and military effectiveness is the same.
Secretary General, we only have a few minutes left, and I have to ask you one of the burning questions ahead of the next couple of days, and that, of course, is Sweden and Finland and their joining the alliance. Where are we today with that question?
The decisions by Finland and Sweden to apply for membership, they are historic, and that will strengthen the security of Finland and Sweden, of NATO, and be important for the whole transatlantic alliance. At the same time, we need to ensure that when new allies or new countries join the alliance, we have to take into account the security interests of all allies. And Turkey has expressed some serious concerns on issues like terrorism. And we all know that no NATO ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey. Thousands of people have been killed, and PKK and other groups, they are responsible for these terrorist attacks, and PKK is a terrorist organization. That is something which is also not only many NATO allies proscribe PKK as a terrorist organization, but the European Union, Finland and Sweden. So of course, to sit down then and discuss with Turkey how can we step up, do more together in fighting terrorism, which is a threat to our security, is an issue that is absolutely legitimate and important as part of the accession process we now and dialogue we now have with Finland and Sweden. I will not, promise anything. I can only tell you that I have spoken several times with President Erdogan, with the Finnish and the Finnish president, and with the Swedish prime minister. We will meet later on today, President Erdogan, President Niinistö, and Prime Minister Andersson, and I hope that we can make some progress. But let's meet first, and then I can update you afterwards.
Secretary General, all my friends in the press corps are going to be jealous of that. When you think about this a bit more broadly, sir, billions of dollars of weapons and aid going to Ukraine, unprecedented economic sanctions on Russia, the Russian ruble currently stable. Those sanctions undoubtedly will see more effectiveness as time goes on. But there is a big portion of the world, part of the world I live in, the Middle East, and looking out to the Sahel, as you mentioned in your speech earlier, to Africa, elsewhere, very worried about food security issues. They're very worried about famine. They're worried about higher energy costs and, frankly, civil and social unrest. What is NATO's leverage there in convincing countries like China, like India, to pay at a cap for Russian oil or to leave Russian energy supplies altogether?
Well, so first of all, again, the food prices, I fully understand that people all over the world, including in the Middle East and in Africa, are extremely concerned. But the reason for increased food prices is not NATO, it's not sanctions, it is Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, full stop. And if President Putin was willing to stop the war, at least allow ships to sail with grain out of Ukraine, it will help to reduce the food prices. I welcome the fact that NATO allies, in different ways, but in particular Turkey and President Erdogan, are engaged in different initiatives to try to find a way to get grain out also on ships over the Black Sea, but also some initiatives to try to at least increase to some extent the amount of food we are getting out on land over NATO and EU territory in Europe. There are some serious logistical challenges with that, but at least it can help perhaps to increase somewhat the amount we are getting out. Then on China, well, one of the messages we have is that we don't regard China as an adversary, and China, of course, is soon the biggest economy in the world. We need to engage with China, for instance, on issues like climate change. It matters for the whole energy market. But we are disappointed by the fact that China has not been able to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that China is spreading many of the false narratives about NATO, the West, and also that China and Russia are more close now than have ever been before. We saw that in the joint statement by China and Russia, President Xi and President Putin, in the beginning of February, where they said that the partnership was limitless, I think was the language, but at least they stated very clearly, both China and Russia, that they were against any NATO enlargement, and that is the first time China so explicitly has in a way had a strong opinion directed against NATO and NATO enlargement.
And doesn't that worry you that there is a situation where you could see NATO versus the rest of the world?
But I mean, we cannot stop support Ukraine because not all countries all over the world supports us. Then we had a vote in the UN where 141 nations condemned the invasion. We have a responsibility to support Ukraine, partly by providing support, military support, economic support, humanitarian support. NATO allies have supported Ukraine since 2014. We didn't wake up in February 2022. Actually, I've been in Yavoriv and other places in Ukraine where I've seen Canadian, US, UK, and also NATO personnel training, helping, equipping the Ukrainian armed forces. The Ukrainian armed forces was much better equipped, much better trained, much larger, much better commanded in 2022 than in 2014. And not least because of the support, the training, the equipment they have received for many years from NATO allied countries. It's first and foremost the bravery, the courage of Ukrainians that have enabled to stand up against the brutal Russian invasion, but the support they have achieved from 2014 and onwards has of course also been key. Now our responsibility is to step up, do more, and be ready to stand for the long haul, because this may last. So if the issue is that we should not do this, because it may create the impression that we have some responsibility for some of the problems in the world economy, the answer is absolutely no. We have to continue to support Ukraine, including imposing a price on Russia by imposing sanctions. And then we have to engage in dialogue, in public communications, to explain that the core problem is not the way we support Ukraine. The core problem is the unprovoked, unjustified war by President Putin against Ukraine. That's the problem.
Secretary General, thank you so much for joining us.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Powell, and I'm the director of the Real Instituto Elcano. It is a great honor and a privilege to welcome His Majesty the King of Spain to this NATO Madrid Public Forum. And on behalf of the institutions which have made this event possible, NATO Public Diplomacy Division, Atlantic Council, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, the Munich Security Conference, and of course our very own Elcano Royal Institute, I would like to thank His Majesty for having found the time to join us this afternoon. Some of you may know that His Majesty the King is also the honorary president of the Elcano Royal Institute, and I would simply like to take this opportunity to welcome him and to thank him publicly for the support and the interest he has always shown in our activities. And finally, let me mention the fact that a couple of weeks ago, he commemorated the 8th anniversary of his coming to the throne as King of Spain. So congratulations, Your Majesty, and thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Charles, for your introduction. Hardly have time to get a warm-up and understand the sessions are going well and interesting and intense as we all hope for. I would like to greet Secretary of State of Foreign Affairs of the Spanish government, Vice Secretary General of NATO, Deputy General Secretary, Secretaria General Adjunta de la División de Diplomacia Pública y Presidente, Chairman of the Elcano Royal Institute, and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a distinct pleasure and an honor to welcome you all to this NATO Public Forum, even if I jump in between sessions. Spain and Madrid are really proud and fortunate to host such an important NATO summit. And I'm especially glad this side event is taking place aimed at engaging civil society into better understanding both the importance of the moment and the substance and consequences of the summit and of the broader gathering with important non-NATO nations. Let me start by thanking the institutions that have worked so hard to make this event possible. NATO's Public Diplomacy Department, the Munich Security Conference, the German Marshall Fund of the US, the Atlantic Council, and of course the Elcano Royal Institute, of which, as you heard, I am proud to be honorary president. Today, as Europe strives for political stability, economic prosperity, and social well-being, it faces the threat of an increasingly unstable neighborhood, both in the east and to the south, and the complex challenge of a chronically unpredictable world. The war in Ukraine is contesting many of the assumptions and beliefs that have prevailed in Europe and in the West for over 3 decades. The Madrid summit and this forum provides us with an opportunity to reflect upon the future of our alliance in what seems to be a turning point in history. And let me also appreciate and acknowledge the presence of the Major of Kiev and his brother here with us. It was, for me, a very pleasant surprise, and I had the opportunity to meet with them briefly and express them what it means for you to be here with us, and to, of course, reiterate our support and our deep thoughts and friendship with your nation, with your people. A mere 20 years ago, we congratulated ourselves for the fact that Europe had never been so secure, so prosperous, or free. Since then, however, many of our post-Cold War assumptions or predictions seem to have evaporated, and many of our hopes have been, for the time, been shoved into the domain of somewhat utopian ideals. The long-standing global struggle between tyranny and democracy is as relevant as ever. Great power competition is everywhere. War goes on. All of which should serve to remind us of the relevance and critical need to preserve the Atlantic Alliance, a family of nations which Spain joined almost exactly 40 years ago. This context underscores the importance of NATO as an alliance that offers credible deterrence against any security threats to its members in Europe and North America, from whatever they may arise or wherever they may arise. It also underlines the importance of military force more generally, and of NATO as a vehicle for military and technological innovation, which remains a core foundation of our security. Finally, this difficult context also reminds us of NATO's relevance as a political community, the best expression of transatlantic unity. More than ever, the alliance is proving to its value as a beacon of freedom, for all our like-minded friends and partners beyond Europe and North America. For as much as NATO is essentially a Euro-Atlantic organization, its values, our values, are by no means exclusive, since they are more widely shared and have a strong universal appeal. Unity and freedom are valuable strategic assets in a world defined by the return of that great power competition and renewed struggle I mentioned between democracy and autocracy, trends that are clearly not confined to the Euro-Atlantic space. The Euro-Atlantic region will remain uppermost amongst NATO's concerns. However, the focus of global economic growth, military competition, and technological rivalry is shifting towards the Indo-Pacific region. Inevitably, developments in and around Europe will probably be increasingly shaped by exogenous forces. This means that we cannot turn our backs on broader geostrategic developments. If anything, the war in Ukraine has taught us how important it is to muster global support in defense of a rules-based order in Europe and the world. We have reason to feel confident that the transatlantic relationship is stronger than ever, and that Europe has remained united in the face of Russia's intolerable aggression. However, garnering support beyond the Euro-Atlantic is proving considerably difficult. This will remain a core challenge for the Atlantic community in the years and decades to come, especially as strategic competitors continue to question the institutional and normative fabric that underpins the open international order that we hold so dear to us. Which is why we are so grateful to count on the solidarity of friends like Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Those representatives are with us here as well in Madrid. In that key challenge, Spain must seek to develop broader understanding of the transatlantic community, one that may allow us to strengthen our connection with Africa and Latin America. In this regard, our country is certainly in an ideal position, both geopolitically and due to our widely shared will to serve as a bridge between the Atlantic, Europe, and the Mediterranean. One of the biggest questions facing the leaders who are gathering in Madrid to reflect on NATO's future will be how to strike the balance, the right balance, between responding to the immediate threats in Eastern Europe and the need to counter the systemic and long-term challenges. Also, how to balance its military and political dimensions, and how to prepare the alliance for an increase in great power competition without losing sight of other transnational challenges that will not go away, such as terrorism or even the climate security nexus. These are not easy binary choices, but I am confident that the alliance's leaders will navigate them successfully. And in this task, which will keep them busy for a good number of years or even decades, they will no doubt need the continuous support and ideas generated by think tanks and civil society groups such as those represented in this forum. Allow me to conclude by wishing you all a successful forum and summit, of course, and also a pleasant stay in Madrid and in Spain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty. I would like now to call upon the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Dr. Mircea Ioana, who, as you all know, has had a very distinguished career both in his home country, Romania, as Romanian ambassador to the United States and foreign minister, and also within NATO. Secretary General, the floor is yours. Deputy Secretary General, thank you.
Thank you so much. Rey Felipe, Majestad, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty, for receiving us in this historic summit in Madrid.
As His Majesty has said so rightly, at a turning point in history. Some of us, some in the media, are preparing to say that this will be, and it will be, a historic summit. Secretary General Stoltenberg and us, we also say it will be a transformative summit, which is also true. But I would dare say that this will be the most important summit of NATO in generations. Generations that never believed, after the atrocities of the First and Second World War, that war is still possible on our continent. It shattered, as His Majesty rightly said, the fabric, the assumptions, the hypotheses in which our societies, our security, our economies were built. This is what NATO does. We have in our DNA a gene of permanent adaptation to changing circumstances. This is what our leaders will do in Madrid. Many of you already comment on the outcomes of the summit. This was not what I will do today. And also because we have here so many dear friends from the closest of the think tanks we've been working with for many years, let me thank you and Bye-Bye and your team for this. I will try to tell you a little bit more of what I believe is the underlying, more transformative assumptions of our decisions in these few days in beautiful Madrid. We all say that we are witnessing an unprecedented unity of the democratic world against this barbarian, atrocious, unprovoked, and illogical war that Russia has waged against innocent Ukraine. This is true. We've never seen so much unity amongst our ranks. And we are here for the long haul. We are here with Ukraine for the long haul. But something I believe is even more important than the political unity of the West is the regalvanization of our democratic society. In every single train station in Europe and North America and elsewhere, you see volunteers with a Ukrainian flag and fundraising money for a charity to help their brothers and sisters in Ukraine. We've done a lot for Ukraine. Since 2014, we are doing things for Ukraine. We'll continue to do things for Ukraine, even here at the summit. But also the private sector from our democratic world reacted without anyone telling them. And you see internet restored in Ukraine, broadband, after a cyber attack by Russia against a satellite that was providing telecommunications and internet to Ukraine. You see major tech companies helping us and helping Ukraine in fighting cyber. This regalvanization of our democratic foundation, I think, is as important and probably more important than the political unity of our political leadership. And especially for our young generation. I said this before. I was a kid in my home country in Romania when USSR invaded Czechoslovakia. I was shocked. It seemed to me something inconceivable. And I think the shock that stayed with me for my whole life in fighting against oppressors, bullies, and so-called great powers in their post-imperial nostalgic dreams. I think this will stay for our young generations all over our democratic world for all their lives. This holy triangle between politics, private sector, and civil society is the strength of our West, is the strength of our alliance, is the strength of the European Union. And doesn't matter how much the autocratic counter-proposition to our democratic proposition of organizing human societies will tell that autocracy and dictatorship is more efficient than democracies. I can tell you something, my friends. When we put all the talent, all the freedom, all the imagination, all the creativity of our free, open societies, no one would ever be able in the position to go ahead of us or, even worse, defeat us. As long as we believe in our values, as long as we harness our democracy, as long as we respect human beings. And yes, we stay true to the values which are the foundation of our unique organization: freedom, democracy, and rule of law. When Secretary General Stoltenberg visited with Pedro Sanchez, with the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Spain, before the war, I would like to thank Ambassador Fernandez Palacios for his, sometimes you just cannot get rid of Miguel. It's something which just is so tenacious. I thought I was tenacious, but Miguel is really even something more than that. Thank you, Miguel, for that. You'll have a Madrid strategic concept from NATO. Congratulations. That's very good. Now, let me tell you something that what the summit represents beyond the obvious decisions that our leaders will take. Strengthening posture on the eastern flank, continue to help Ukraine, and of course, hopefully, under the auspices of Jens Stoltenberg, eventually getting good news from our Scandinavian future new allies. If you look to the decisions that our leaders will take, I'll not get into details, you'll be seeing a massive set of documents. We'll be talking and deciding not only about the eastern flank of NATO, as important as it is and will continue to be for us, unprecedented reinforcement of the eastern flank, unprecedented reinvention of the way in which we do deterrence and defense. But the south is also very important. We defined Russia as the dominant challenge and threat in conventional terms to the east, but also the strategic concept will define terrorism and pervasive instability as the most important asymmetrical threat to our security. Just before, Secretary General was talking about climate change and security, food insecurity, scarce resources, fragile governments, very unhappy young populations. This is fueling terrorism. And as we have to be vigilant and be strong in countering Russia, we have to continue to invest in these neighborhoods of ours because they are important to our security. And this is what this 360-degree approach of NATO to security is so important. If you look again to the decisions that our leaders will take tomorrow, not all of them will catch the eye of the press, and it shouldn't. The press is in the business of highlighting the most important things. There are tens of documents that, in fact, reflect that gene of adaptability of NATO, which means a broader definition of security itself. We'll take decisions on cyber. We'll take decisions on resilience. We'll take decisions on hybrid. We'll take decisions in fighting disinformation. We'll take decisions on climate change and security. We'll take decisions on space. We'll take decisions on partnerships. We'll reinforce our partnership with the European Union. This is, in fact, what the summit of these 2 days in beautiful Madrid is representing. Is the answer of the democratic world to geopolitical revisionism? We have on our side the regalvanization of our democracies, a revitalization of our institutions, and a sense of purpose. And let me end in saying something to our Ukrainian friends. And dear Mayor, thank you so much for everything you do and your leadership. We are here for the long haul. And we know that your country needs support more and more and more. We are here to say that we'll be helping you more and more and more. Slava Ukraina. Your fight is our fight. Thank you so much.
challenges our very own perception of security. It is man-made, but can be attributed to a physical adversary. Yet, it impacts everything NATO does. It affects how we deploy our militaries and how they operate. It shapes interaction and competition between states, which is perhaps most evident in the Arctic. It also impacts where we do crisis management and how we do it in terms of assets needed. Extreme weather events can lead to drought or land degradation, and as people become more desperate for food and for water, there's a higher conflict and migration potential in NATO's neighborhood. So it impacts not just our own security, but also that of our neighbors and partners across the globe. NATO, as a security organization, can be indifferent to these challenges. The world is changing, and we need to change with it. Understanding and adapting to the impacts of climate change is important, but so is the need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and military carbon footprint.
Gentlemen, if you would please kindly stand to bid farewell to His Majesty the King of Spain. And we will now move on seamlessly in a few minutes to the next session. Thank you.
Once again, everybody, good afternoon. We're going to reconnect with the NATO Public Forum. If you'd like to return to your seats, we'll get started. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd love to get started once again with the NATO Public Forum. We're going to be talking yet again about rising temperatures and rising tensions and how climate security, energy security, and national security are one. If you'd like to re-enter the hall and take your seats, we'll get started in just a moment. You front and center. Once again, I want to welcome all of you to this high-level dialogue on climate and security. I'm Hadley Gamble, CNBC's senior international correspondent and anchor based in Abu Dhabi, covering geopolitics and energy and all of the above. It's fantastic to be back here at NATO with the Munich Security Conference, as well as the Atlantic Council and others, hosting what I think is a pivotal moment, frankly, for all of us that cover these issues and are interested in them, and certainly for the NATO alliance itself. I want to invite to the stage Rainer Bach. He's the founder of the Climate Neutrality Foundation, for a few remarks, and then I'm going to pepper him with questions. Rainer.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hadley. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think there has been no time in history when the targets, the goals of climate policy, security policy, and energy security were so much matching. If we look at the problems in these three areas, they all have the same source. It is fossil fuels. It has been because of our excessive use of oil, coal, and gas that mankind has become a force of geological dimensions. We have changed the climate on the planet. And if we look at what happened over the last decades, this hunger for cheap energy, in this particular case of cheap pipeline gas from Russia, has maneuvered us into this dependency that has made us vulnerable as Russia has attacked Ukraine. And as a result, our security of supply is at risk. But just as the source of the problems are the same, so is the solution. The solution is we have to invest into a magnificent increase of energy efficiency, and we massively have to expand renewable energies. And by doing so, we will prevent a dangerous climate change, we will free ourselves from the dependency from Russia, and we will restore our energy security because renewable energies are a domestic source. I find it unbearable that right now we are financing two armies. We are financing our own NATO armies with our taxes, and at the same time, with the payments for gas and for oil, we are financing Putin's army that is currently attacking Ukraine. And I cannot spare those in politics and business who over the last decades have been standing on the brakes, slowing down the energy transition, the reproach that they have maneuvered us into this situation. We would be much better off today if we would have twice the amount of renewable energies in Europe and a better efficiency in using our energies. Ladies and gentlemen, let's look ahead. I fully understand the emergency measures that our governments are taking right now, LNG, for example. But at no time must these emergency measures keep us from working on removing the real source of the problem. That means we have to go full speed now in the direction of climate neutrality. We know what has to be done. We have to electrify everything. We have to electrify our transport sector, we have to electrify our housing sector, we have to electrify our industry production. And of course, this only makes sense if the power for this electrification comes from CO2-free renewable energies. The demand will increase significantly when we drive with electricity our cars, when we heat our houses with heat pumps, and when we reorganize our industrial processes so they can work with electricity instead of fossil fuels. There are some small areas where this electrification doesn't work. For example, steel production. There we need hydrogen. But hydrogen is also electrification. It's not direct, but it's indirect electrification, because green hydrogen you produce with green electricity via splitting water, H2O, in H2, that's hydrogen, and O, that is oxygen. So it is all about electrification with renewable energy sources. And we need this hydrogen for another purpose. We need it as a backup capacity for those times when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. Then we're going to use hydrogen as a gas for gas generators instead of natural gas. So batteries are short-term storage, hydrogen is the long-term storage. On this path to climate neutrality, we will be witnessing an efficiency revolution. This will simply come about because we are not going to waste all that energy that we are wasting typically when we use fossil fuels, for example, in generators to produce electricity, or when we use diesel or gasoline in combustion engine cars or in furnaces to heat our houses. In all these processes, about 50% of the energy is wasted. With electrification, this waste belongs to the past. However, ladies and gentlemen, at least Europe is not going to become energy self-sufficient. We can produce all the power we need for this comprehensive electrification, and we will use some of that also for producing hydrogen, but we do not have the capacity to produce all the green hydrogen that we need. And that's why we need to import in the future. And when I look at the disaster that we are experiencing right now with Russia, I just hope that we choose our partners carefully. And we should definitely apply one principle in our trade policy in the future that we have been using in our power sector actually for decades. It's called N-1. And in the power sector, it means that we design our power systems so that one big generator or one big power line can fail and the system remains stable. And I think we have to apply this very same principle now to our trade policy. It must be possible that one big exporter fails and we are not going to experience a domestic crisis, economic crisis at home. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I would like to address one issue that affects NATO armies directly. As far as I understand, the vast majority of the NATO members have national targets of climate neutrality. Some have the target 2050, others, like the country that I come from, Germany, 2045. Now, of course, no member state can become climate neutral if the armed forces are not climate neutral. And this means that there has to be an alternative to fossil kerosene for flying planes. There has to be an alternative to diesel and petrol for driving cars and trucks and tanks, and there has to be an alternative to the fossil fuel we use in ships. These, in principle, exist. We know how to make CO2-free kerosene. What technologies it's going to be for cars and trucks, I don't know. Fuel cells maybe, or maybe synthetic, CO2-free synthetic fuels, or batteries. And what happens in the ship, I don't know. Maybe it's ammonia, maybe it is methanol. But this debate we need now. If I look at my country that wants to become climate neutral 2045, and there's a decision of our Constitutional Court behind that, looking at it from today, that is 22 years and 6 months. So we're actually talking here about a very, very short period of time. And I believe it is really necessary that this debate, how do we make the military climate neutral, is going to pick up now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Rainer, I'd love to ask you to expand a bit on terms of the partners that you were discussing, because when we talk about partners in energy security and national security, we have to choose wisely. That's part of the conversation we've been having, whether it be Russia or China or elsewhere. I want to ask you specifically about the 3 Seas region and Ukraine itself. How important do you believe Ukraine and the Eastern European countries can be towards energy security for broader Europe? Because I know there are a lot of conversations happening right now, billions of dollars being committed by Ukrainian companies to renewables in that area. What does that look like to you?
Well, I think these countries have great potential, and hopefully they're going to be part of the EU single market in the future. So all the EU legislation, from climate targets, renewable targets, efficiency targets, will also apply to these new member states. And I think their potential is fantastic. But I would consider them internal market. What I meant was, who are we going to trade with in the other parts of the world? And I think there we should look very, very carefully. When I talk about that we are going to electrify everything on the pathway to climate neutrality. That means the power, the renewable power, we can produce and we should produce ourselves in Europe. We can do that. The hydrogen is the issue. And there are other parts of the world that have great solar and wind conditions. And there we should look carefully. Who are we going to partner with? And my suggestion is to look at democratically governed countries, like, for example, Namibia, like Uruguay, like Chile, and work with them, because democracies don't cause the problems that Russia has been causing lately. So that would be my suggestion. Work with these countries. They have great potential. Make them offers. And I think this is also very important that the industrialized countries include African and South American countries into this transition.
When you think about that a bit more broadly, obviously I'm coming from a region of the world where some of the biggest oil producers are sitting. They have a lot of problems with the West's actions with Russia at this point. I'm talking specifically about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, GCC oil producers. They're making incredible windfall profits from the energy costs that we're seeing today. And according to them, and according to their national strategies, they're plugging a lot of that money back into renewables. They're talking about hydrogen and elsewhere. Do you believe that those governments would pose a problem in terms of partnering with them for the future of European security? Because we're already talking to Qatar, obviously, to fill that gap of LNG.
Yeah, we're talking with them in a situation where we don't really have many alternatives. I mean, why are they making these windfall profits? Because our economies rely so much on fossil fuels. And the moment we really are serious about transforming, this dependency will decrease. So I very much welcome, and I think it is a wise decision for the countries in the region where you live, to now take this extra revenue and invest in renewable energies, because that is going to be the future. Look, we are discussing in Europe right now a reform of our emission trading system. There's a cap on all the emissions of the power sector and all the industrial installations in Europe. And there's going to be a very sharp decline now in the future somewhere around 2045 is going to be zero. So there are no more emissions in our power, in our industrial sector, 2045. What that means for oil-producing countries, I don't have to explain to anybody. But there is a huge need, of course, for climate-friendly products like hydrogen, or you can make out of hydrogen methanol or ammonia. These are the products that will be used in the future. I don't think that this region, this particular region, is going to need much help from us. They have economic resources that are fantastic, but I'm thinking about other countries in Africa and Latin America, which I think we have a strong interest in really partnering with them and offering them also some special conditions.
What about the United States? Because you and I were having a conversation offsite a little bit earlier about what could derail the transition, which countries, and I asked you about China specifically, if you were worried about China, and you said, actually, I'm more worried about the United States. Walk us through that.
Well, we saw about 6 years ago what happened when a president was elected who thought that believing in climate change would be optional, and he dropped out of the Paris Protocol. Luckily, this was limited to 4 years, even though, as we are learning these days, there was the attempt to overthrow an elected new government. And I think we should all worry about how things are going to go in the United States in the future. It's the biggest economy, and it is the most important member of NATO. And we can just all only hope that it's going to have a stable government in the future that is standing behind NATO and that is standing behind the targets of climate change, the targets of battling climate change.
As a son of a Saudi king once said to me, the energy market binds the world together. He was saying it in slightly a different context, but I'll apply it here. How do you believe energy can play a role when it comes to changing the minds or influencing the minds of countries that didn't necessarily support the UN resolution on Ukraine?
Well, there are few countries that are important in other continents. Let's take South Africa, for example. I think it is worth all the effort to start real serious cooperation with South Africa. I just saw that President Ramaphosa had been invited to the summit in Germany. I think that is a good step. But at the end, of course, there have to be more than just talking relationships. There have to be economic benefit situations for both. And we talked before a little bit about, for example, synthetic kerosene for flying planes. South Africa has a chemical plant, Sasol, that is the biggest in Africa. What do they do there? They take coal, and out of coal they make synthetic fuels, for example, diesel and petrol, and also kerosene. Now, it is possible to do that in a green way, but for that there has to be transition away from coal to renewable energies and to hydrogen, and then they can produce synthetic green products like, for example, airplane fuel. And I think it is in the interest of Europe, of the United States, of the NATO members, and South Africa to cooperate on issues like that. And I think if these things bring us together and there's a better understanding, then hopefully at the next vote at the UN Council, South Africa might vote differently.
Reiner, thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to invite our panelists to join me on stage as well. Obviously, I'm thrilled to be on a panel with a lot of ladies, which is not often the case when we're talking climate and energy and national security. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. We're also waiting on another participant of the group, and we're going to just hope that she pops up at some point in the near future. I just want to welcome our panelists briefly. Annalena Moreno-Bau is the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs of Spain. Welcome. Annalena Baerbock, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Germany. It's great to have you here on the panel, as well as Anita Anand, the Minister of National Defense of Canada. Hello. Hello, how are you, Sherry? And Sherry, good.
Great.
Secretary General, International Military Council on Climate and Security, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
I want to kick off by asking the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany to give us her assessment of President Zelensky's remarks at the G7, essentially saying that he would like the invasion to be over, the war to be over by the end of the year, and he would hope that all of Ukraine will be once again a sovereign nation. Do you believe that's a possibility and a realistic outlook?
Well, this is what we are all. My microphone is not working, obviously.
Technical difficulties.
Now, no.
Oh. Once again, and with some feeling. One of the things, obviously, that we've been talking about over the last couple of hours has been, obviously, the confluence, the nexus between energy security and national security. It's a subject that I've covered at length since I interviewed President Putin back in October, and I challenged him before an audience of hundreds of people in his own country about whether or not he was using energy as a weapon to fight democracy. And he denied it multiple times and then called me too beautiful to understand his answer. I'd like to pose now, once again, to the Foreign Minister. Still not having a microphone. Excellent. We're working on it. I think we're getting there. Anita, when you think about what happens next with regards to the energy situation, the Secretary General essentially saying to me earlier that he wanted to set new goals for NATO and change the course of the way we decarbonize armies, to carbonize militaries, but you also have to have buy-in from the civilians as well, the civilian sector, if you will. Mm-hmm. How difficult do you think that it's going to be to continue to sell the climate change agenda at a time when higher energy prices are frankly making it very, very difficult for normal everyday life? And I'm just talking about across the West, beyond the situation in Ukraine.
It is an excellent point and a conundrum, but there is a way, there is a path forward here. The first thing we have to remember from a Canadian standpoint is what we are seeing in Canada represents what is happening all over the world. Between 1990 and 2010, there were just 6 Canadian Armed Forces domestic deployments to natural disasters. Since 2011, there have been 30. So this is the conundrum that we're focused on in Canada domestically, and it represents what the world at large is experiencing as well. And as we move to a greener future, interoperability is going to be key. And we know that interoperability is a keystone of NATO. And so what we've got to do with our batteries, with our charging stations, with our networks, with our tanks, we have to make sure that they're not only utilizing green technology, but that the interoperability piece is present. What that means for procurement is that our engagement with industry has to be consistent both domestically and internationally so that NATO allies are utilizing similar technology. And the final point I'll make is that I'm not sure if the audience knows, but at last year's Leaders Summit, Canada offered to establish and host a NATO Climate Change and Security Centre of Excellence to help NATO allies and global partners understand and adapt to these types of situations, which I'm pointing out right now in a climate-impacted security environment. And today I'm pleased to announce that we have selected Montreal, Quebec, in Canada to be the host city. And this is great news for Montreal, it's great news for Canada, and it's great news for NATO because Montreal is a thriving ecosystem of climate-focused businesses. And what we do need to do in the defense and security industry is to leverage our relationships with business to make sure that the products coming off the line, the batteries and the tanks and the charging stations, are green and can be utilized across the board.
Reiner was just mentioning in his comments earlier that the great tragedy here is that we are financing 2 armies, whether it be Vladimir Putin's war machine that is devastating Ukraine, or our own NATO ally forces, I want to ask the Foreign Minister of Germany, who's with us, and hopefully has her mic working, to walk me through how realistic you think President Zelensky's hope of ending the war by the end of the year really is at this point, and having Ukraine intact as a sovereign state.
Well, this is, it's still not working. Well, maybe it's a boycott from somewhere else of the microphone, so but then you cannot hear it outside. Well, I speak loud, and maybe in between we can find another cable that it can work again. Sir? Move me where?
To the podium here, to the right.
Yeah. It's going to be standing room only. No? Yes.
Yes.
Hooray! But then I don't need this. If I speak with this? Well, this is good. I mean, we're talking about so much hard stuff, so a bit laughing is good for the soul, I would say. But sitting here together with also the mayor of Kiev, I think we have to be very frank, and nobody knows, but we are doing everything that Ukraine will stay a sovereign state and that the whole country can live in peace and liberty all together. And as the President has underlined it, this is the hope, and this is why we have to do everything that the hope stays. And this is why also at this NATO summit, we are underlining that we are not only continuing delivering hard weapons to Ukraine, but that we are increasing our efforts to do so, because every day counts. And I think this is really important, because we don't know how long this war will continue. It can stop tomorrow if the Russian president will end the bombing. It's all up to him. He can end the war tomorrow, and then we can face all the challenges we are having anyhow at the world. But if he's not doing so, every day counts also with military support. All the Ukrainians here in the audience know it better than I do. There are soldiers dying every day. There are civilians dying every day. So if we are increasing also weapons delivery, this helps saving lives also every day as this war is going on. And on the other hand, jumping to the topic we are having here, I think this is a big challenge, and this is also one of the strategies Putin is following, that we are forgetting about other crises, like the food war he's also launching, like the hybrid war on fake news, but also that we are forgetting about the climate crisis. And we see around the world, if we are forgetting about this crisis, other countries, other nations, other civilians will say, so why don't you care about us? So in this middle of the fight for the freedom, for the peace and liberty for Ukraine, we still have to keep up the efforts fighting the climate crisis, because it's the disaster of the 21st century.
How do you get the messaging right here? Because I live in a part of the world, the Middle East, that is not necessarily on board with the reaction of NATO allies to President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. When you talk to the billions of people outside of the West who look at the situation and say, we've got a cost of living crisis, we could potentially have famine, like in Africa, like in parts of the Middle East, what is your message to them? Why is it this important?
Well, first of all, I'm not talking about the West. I think we really have to consider that we are living in the year 2022. And this is a war we are fighting between liberal democracies, those countries believing in the rule of international law, believing in the power of international law. And this was why it was so important that at the United Nations it was 141 countries, not only from Europe, not only from Northern America, not only from Australia, but around the globe, who said we do not accept this breach of international law. Because if we are accepting this, and I think this is the most important message from this Madrid NATO summit, this fatigue which is there, saying, okay, maybe this is too hard to stand. But if we accept this, we will accept that one country is breaching everything we are standing for, and that we accept it in the end. This would be a loss for the United Nations in the end. And this is why, answering your question, when we go around the world, we are saying this is also about you. Every country in the world, almost every country, has a bigger neighbor. And if we accept here that a bigger and stronger and more powerful neighbor can just invade another country and we close our eyes, this can happen to everybody. And secondly, we are making clear we do see, we hear, that also our countries, and there we can say from the past, Western countries did not act in some moments when other countries needed us. And I think this is a big challenge, and this is also where we have to be frank and clear that we don't close our eyes when we have fundamental violations of international law, of human rights. And this was also, for example, why I, as a foreign minister, made very clear when we had the reports on China that we are not being silent, even though in this tricky situation we also need China to have a stand there. But if we are starting to balance between one aggressor, one autocratic regime, and saying the other one is only a little worse, I think then we are also losing the trust in international law.
And just to follow on to that, after the G7 conversations over the weekend, there was a big push to float an idea of a price cap for Russian oil. Who should be leading those conversations? I asked the Secretary General. He said, that's not my remit. We know the International Energy Agency has said, that's not my remit either. Who's, in your view, going to have to lead this initiative? Is it going to have to be the EU or individual countries?
Well, if we believe in the international communities, then we have to be united. And this is our strongest asset, that we are united within the 141 states, which is not a given. We are losing countries. But that we are united within the EU, that we are united within NATO and G7. And I mean, everybody knows in the room we had the debate in Elmau, because this is also the difficult situation. And I mean, if it would be easy, all these problems would have been solved. That we see the countermeasures. If we put the price gap, and this has been discussed in Elmau, then it could be that in the end Russia wins even more. So if we are doing this, and we are in close contact because United States were proposing this firsthand, so we're in discussion it, we have to do it right. We saw it now with the war on corn. I mean, my heart bleeds that Putin is in a way successful with this. From the first minute on, we try to counter his narrative. But frankly speaking, I mean, we are not successful in every country. And this is why, for me, it's so important. If we are taking steps of sanction, we have to think above what is going to be his counter-reaction, what is going to be his narrative in the end. Because with the war on corn, we said, okay, there's no sanction on corn, there's no sanction on health, but anyhow, unluckily, some countries are believing it. So if we are doing this, we have to make sure that not other countries around the world who are anyhow suffering from high prices on energy, who do not have electricity anymore, because I mean Germany is a rich country. We spent more than 10 billion euros to counter the price effects on energy, and other countries cannot do it. So if we are talking about these kind of measures, we may have to make sure that in the end, not this is a success for Putin again, because we have 15 countries out of the 141 saying, well, this is now hard enough for us. So we have to do it together, and we have to do it together in mind with those countries who have also effects of these measures we are taking. But in the end, it's all about Ukrainian people to save their life and to make sure that they will win this war.
Sherry, I want to bring you in on this one in terms of the U.S. response. Are you concerned by what you've been seeing over the last 2 years or so coming from the Biden administration? Because while there was a great deal of momentum at the very beginning of the administration when they came to office on the climate change and green energy initiative, as a result of higher energy prices and a host of other factors, the war in Ukraine, rising inflation, we've seen the Fed taking a stand. However, that hasn't brought prices down in any significant way. And we understand that the Secretary of Energy had a meeting with the oil and gas community in the United States, and it lasted less than an hour. So there seems to be a major disconnect between what the administration wants to get done and what they're able to get done at this point.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I really wish I could join you in person. I do think, it's a very difficult balancing act at this particular moment. But as we often say with the military community, and I'm here representing the International Military Council on Climate and Security, you have to be able to walk and chew gum. So, in the short term, yes, we need to ensure that we have adequate existing energy supplies to meet the daily needs of Americans and of others around the world. But we still have to move quickly because we experience the climate crisis as a threat multiplier now daily in our daily activities, from wildfires, from sea level rise, from extreme weather events, from extreme heat. We're experiencing this now all the time. And so our militaries have to be at the forefront of leading by example, becoming more, as Secretary General Stoltenberg said, setting the gold standard by enabling us to become more resilient, adapting our defense, and at the same time leading towards a decarbonized defense with the technologies which will allow us to decarbonize our society, from electrification to microgrids. And so I think we have to be able to do both. We have to meet urgent current needs, and yes, it's often a challenge, but we have to keep our eye also on the long-term health of our societies, our food security, and our energy security.
To you. When you think about what happens going forward, we're talking so much about, obviously, the climate change and the impact, frankly, that our militaries have on the world. Essentially, we've seen the Secretary General calling in his new strategy for a readiness force of 300,000. How difficult do you think it's going to be to maintain the climate change goals and at the same time secure Europe?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for gathering this meeting with five women, and talking about climate change. I think that in the past 40 years, we have done a big progress. Now, gender issues, equality, and climate change issues are in our DNA. They belong to all we deal with. They are cross-cutting. So I think they are here to remain, these questions. But of course, we are facing a war, and the war has terrible consequences on our environment, not only in terms of the gas emissions of weapons, the fires in the forests that we cannot stop. But of course, we are facing the oil and fossil fuel rise of the prices. So one thing we cannot do, of course, we are committed to give a resolute response to the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. But we cannot forget that we have a compromise with future generations. It's the survival of the species, of the planet, and we need to keep our roadmap to decarbonization, to a transition in our energies. So renewable energy has to be there. We need to, as the Secretary General of the United Nations said, we don't need to be hitting the brake. We need to be putting the pedal to the metal in terms of the energy transition. And this is an occasion to use this war as an opportunity to transition to a more ecological energy. I think that we are working on that. We are working on that in the European Union with our Repower EU program. We are working on that again in all our across all our programs in the European Union. We are working on that nationally. We are giving a response to our citizens also in this crisis. We are giving a response, and we are also helping them understand that they need to change their patterns of consumption. We need, as the International Energy Agency proposed, we need to give them some points, some patterns, some models to change their consumption patterns, so they can drive a bicycle instead of a car, they can put the heating a bit lower, they can walk a bit longer distances, and we need to put these in the minds of our population. We are at war. We are at war, and we need to transmit them that we have an economy of war. So we don't need, I think, to be so afraid to talk frankly to our population. They know very well what we are dealing with, and they are very supportive. I have to say that the Spanish population is 83% supportive of NATO now. This is not what we had 40 years ago. So it proves that the people of Spain are committed to supporting Ukraine against the Russian aggression. These allies committed to supporting Ukraine, and we need to be more confident in the capacity of the population to be responsible.
But will they be supporting Ukraine when it turns cold, when the cost of living crisis begins to really sink in?
Well, we need to keep on, as I said, putting the pedal to the metal in terms of renewable energy. We have solar energy, wind energy, plenty of solutions, green hydrogen. We need to be dealing with this.
Yeah. I want to get the Canadian perspective on this one, because obviously just to your south, your neighbors in the United States have had some pretty violent swings, if you will, when it comes to their climate policies over the last couple of years. And of course, that has impacted the oil and gas industry. We've seen them pumping a lot of their revenues back into shareholders' pockets, if you will, instead of reinvestment in the oil and gas sector. And that's something that's really, in many ways, derailed the transition. When you think about it from a perspective as a policymaker, what are some of the things that we should be focused on? Because when I speak to the CEOs of major oil and gas companies, like Exxon, like BP, like Eni, they essentially tell me this is a crisis in many ways of our own creating, and that we shouldn't be demonizing the industry at this point. We should be putting more emphasis on them moving toward renewables, but certainly not calling them to the carpet.
Well, thanks for the question. And certainly, as I said in my first remarks, industry is so important. I just want to take a moment and say hello to Mayor Klitschko and his brother from Ukraine. As you know, Canada stands with Ukraine, and we have an incredibly large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, and we've been doing whatever we can to continue to build the bridge between Ukraine and Canada, and we'll keep going. In terms of the issues that you raised, I want to, if I could, just bring it to a security and defense perspective, given that this is a NATO conversation. And your question dealt more generally with industry, but I think we actually have to pull it into a security and defense analysis. And I will say a few things in that regard. What we have to do is we have to green defense. And we need industry to go along with us when we are doing that. But it is going to need to be pushed at a governmental level. And how do we green defense? Well, first of all, we need to identify places to improve energy efficiency in our infrastructure and in our commercial fleet. So whatever fleet we're talking about, whether it is our vehicle fleet, whether it is our armed vehicle fleets, whether it is our air or sea fleets, we need to be thinking about a green policy that addresses each aspect of air, land, and sea. And then we need to have that conversation with industry. So to your point, industry is focused to a large degree on their shareholder-driven profits. Actually, I used to be a corporate law professor, so I used to teach this to my students every year. But the other thing we have to remember is shareholders themselves are changing their views. There's something called ESG, environmental and social governance, and it is very, very strong amongst the major pension plans and institutional investors. So we are going to continue to see institutional investors taking a very strong approach on the need for climate and green policies in terms of the companies that they're investing in. Another thing we have to do is we have to make sure that new buildings are decked out with energy efficient technology, and that's going to require, again, government. When you are investing in new military bases across your countries, when you are selling off or purchasing assets, the green equation has to be built into the contracts that you are signing. And then finally, we have to test energy solutions and new technologies that can be used in our international deployments. And as we think about the war in Ukraine, as we donate vehicles and other military equipment to Ukraine, the issue of, as I said, interoperability becomes more and more poignant. And what I think we need to do as an alliance going forward is have this very conversation about interoperability in the green space. How do we ensure that what we are donating, for example, is interoperable? How do we ensure that what we are purchasing and investing in is interoperable in terms of having green energy solutions? And we have to reach our climate targets, and we have to do that regardless of the current situation and going forward. This has got to be a long-term goal, or we will have the tragedy of the commons eating all of us and our resources alive.
I want to follow on to that for the Foreign Minister of Germany, if you could. I hope we've fixed your mic now, but when you think about this a bit more broadly and you think about partners in the energy space, obviously what's happened with Russia has upended the energy dynamic for at least another generation. Ukraine is looking to be a transition hub. It's looking to be a part of the grid, to link up with Eastern Europe, the Three Seas area, and provide energy solutions, renewables, a big part of that, to the rest of Europe. How do you see Germany working with Ukraine specifically and the Eastern European countries to make that a reality? Because according to folks I'm speaking to, with a few $1 billion of investment, renewables could be up and running in the next 3 years. How does that factor into your foreign planning in order to incorporate them into your energy mix?
Well, it's the major part, because it's not an energy mix anymore. We decided as a new government before the war that we are phasing out with all fossil fuels, starting by coal, but also gas, that gas infrastructure is only allowed till a certain time, and afterwards operators lose their permission, because we have experience, if we are not doing this, we are paying a lot of money to get the phasing out realized. And I'm not in line with your thesis saying that this process has stopped. Actually, it's the opposite. I see in so many countries, in so many regions, also like in my country, we have also parts of Germany where not everybody is saying, well, great, build the next windmill. But at this moment, this is not only a question about saving our planet, saving our lives, saving the climate. This is a question for peace. And I've been arguing for myself for a couple of years already, saying that the dependency on fossil fuels is also a geostrategic question. And now we brutally see that this is reality. So renewable energy is actually also a form of liberty energy. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's so important, if we are investing now so much money, that we are doing it right. And we started, for example, having the Moldova conference because they need also the security that we are there, that we are with them, because Russia, again, with fossil fuels, was trying to kill them by cutting them off the electricity, by saying the price is so high that Moldova is not capable of paying it anymore. So now we are supporting them, and we connected them also with regard to the grid, as we did with Ukraine. And again, this is not a question only of energy. This is a question of solidarity, and in the end, this is a question of survival. And we connected them, but also we are building renewable power plants in Moldova. when I was in Ukraine before the war started, I was discussing with the Ukrainian government about hydrogen project with German companies from wind parks. And this was also, for example, one of the reasons why we, as one of the last countries, said we close our embassies. Because the question now is that investors are not like leaving the country, and we are back in Ukraine with our embassy, making clear that it's so crucial that companies invest, even though it's difficult, and we support these kind of investments into renewable energy. And worldwide, this is also something when I go abroad, obviously we need new sources of renewable energy, making clear that this is interconnected. We as Germany, we can never face a situation again that we can be blackmailed because we are depending totally on one country. And this is also so important, making clear to other countries that the rule of law, that human rights, this is connected to our investments, and that our investments are connected to CO2. And as my colleague has said, it's all the question about companies and the pricing. So that's why we are lobbying so much also for a CO2 price, not only within the European Union, and this is something we have to discuss also with our friends across the Atlantic Ocean. This is why for us as G7 presidency, it was so important to say subsidies for fossil infrastructure. This is not the way to go forward, because if we do it right, we can promise, or we can keep up our promise we gave in 2015 at the climate COP. Some of you have been there as me in Paris. We did not only promise, which we didn't do in the years afterwards, that we will bring the world on this track below 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. We also promised towards Africa that we are using this momentum of electrification to also electrify Africa, and we haven't done so. So the question of investment, of renewable energy, of energy independency is highly connected to development, and nothing from this can be killed by the Russian war. We have to bring everything together, and I think at this moment there is, in these horrible times, this chance of doing it way faster than we actually thought a couple of months ago.
And even still, we're talking about this energy transition. U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to go to Saudi Arabia and Israel in just a few weeks from now. There are a lot of conversations in my part of the world about what he's actually hoping to achieve. From Germany's perspective, does OPEC have a role to play here? Because as OPEC, they also have a very distinct relationship with Russia, and China is the largest foreign direct investor in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other Gulf Arab countries. So when you think about them as a potential conduit for a conversation or having some leverage there, what does Germany believe OPEC's role ought to be in this current crisis?
The question is which crisis, but OPEC plays a role in both crises. The Russian war on Ukraine, I've talked also to the governments. Unfortunately, then COVID came in between, so I couldn't go there in person. But, well, obviously, they have also the power to say how much oil they are producing at the current momentum, and it's a decision by them if they would produce more oil or if they wouldn't. And on the other hand, as I said, when we are talking about future contracts also on renewable energy, then the question of rule of law is crucial. This is also something for these countries. And again, I mean, I'm always in this time also positive thinking, otherwise you shouldn't go into politics, I think. We had just a conference on food security, and there were also ministers from OPEC countries. And they have also made clear that they understand that they have a responsibility also with regard to the food crisis. I think there are countries which can do more, but we have to work together. If I may, I would like to jump a bit more on the climate crisis and the question of security, because the big challenge we are facing is like in regions like Sahel, where the climate crisis hits together with the food crisis and the security crisis. And that climate really works as a crisis accelerator. This is something we really do have to understand. I think it's really important that in the new NATO strategic concept, we understand that one of the major points is to understand that the climate crisis is a security issue. A couple of years ago, people said this is soft politics, like female foreign politics as well. But now we understand that this is hard stuff because the wars are going about water. They are about natural resources. If you're in Mali and you used to build, to grow cotton on your fields, and you're not capable of doing this anymore because it has 50 degrees. I mean, it's so easy for terrorist organizations to come to the villages and say, well, we do have a job for your son. He can be one of our soldiers. So bringing this up on the international level is something else we have to do. Building renewable, but understanding if we are not winning this fight on the climate crisis, we are losing security all around the world.
Can I just add a sentence on to that point, which is I 100% agree with you that we need to actually elevate the climate crisis to a national security risk. And if we don't all actually understand that climate mishaps and climate crises, whether it's forest fires, whether it's floods, whether it's tornadoes, if we don't recognize that those are security risks, we won't actually be able to engage military and broader communities in the conversation about how to address them. And that's why I think this conversation is so useful, because what we really need to do is get past the point that it's a national security risk. I think we all should agree with that. And then we should be talking about how we can address it, what's on the to-do list, how we can coordinate across national and international borders to come up with the plan going forward.
I just want to mention that there are microphones on both sides of the room. If there are questions from the audience, you can maneuver over to one of these microphones and I'll come to you. One of the questions that we had polled folks within the Munich Security Conference and the NATO Public Forum was one about pessimism and optimism. Essentially, are you more pessimistic or more optimistic over the last 5 years, what we've seen in the energy space? And I'd just like to get a sense from the Minister of Spain what you feel is going well and what you feel is not going so well, because obviously the Russian war in Ukraine has upended this conversation to a huge degree.
Well, obviously the situation in our security is gloomy. It is very bad, worse than 6 months ago. But the fact that we are maintaining this conversation is leads me to being optimistic, because we need to carry on walking and to carry on working for the survival of the species. I think that this is great. The fact that we finally connect security and climate change, and that we speak about the Sahel and Africa in our NATO security concept, the fact that we, European Union, are the first donor in Africa trying to develop infrastructures, go through the entire Agenda 2030, through all the SDGs, and work on health, on food security, etc. Of course, much more has to be done, but connecting all these issues is essential. Looking from a security perspective, looking from a development perspective, a political perspective, and connecting everything is going to help us very much, as well as connecting all partners. SDG 17 is key. We have to be working with international organizations, with the private sector, with civil society, NGOs, with academia. And the fact is, we are all going through the same tracks. We are all speaking about climate change and security in different fora. We are all dealing with food insecurity at this very moment, but we are also trying to pass messages to those third countries which will be more affected by the food security. We are trying to get the grain out of Ukraine, so we are really committed to the future of our Agenda 2030, and I think that this is very good news, so I'm optimistic.
Yeah. Sherry, I want to bring you in on this one. When you think about whether you're pessimistic or optimistic, this is a subject you've been covering for quite a while.
Yes, and thank you. And I want to thank our Canadian partners for stepping up to lead the Center of Excellence on Climate and Security. I think it's a wonderful addition to NATO. And to our German and Spanish ministers, thank you both for your leadership in this area, for connecting climate and security, for Spain's hosting of this event, and for our Ukrainian partners. Never again should an aggressor be able to weaponize energy and cost so many innocent lives. And that's what makes me, at the end, be optimistic that we are connecting the dots here from the prolonged drought and desertification that is upending the Sahel and allowing terrorists to wreak havoc with climate-induced crises across the region, to a changing Arctic with retreating sea ice and collapsing permafrost. We have a whole new ocean that's opened up in our lifetimes, and not only does that create a new geopolitical and geostrategic risks and different dynamics in that region, but it could lead to widespread ecological damage as the permafrost thaws, releases increased methane, and beyond. So we have to realize that climate is very much part of our security. Now, when we think about how our militaries, and NATO, of course, is a defense organization, can lead in this, militaries have been organizations leading technological innovation for decades. And here's another way in which green defense procurement can also give us a competitive advantage on the battlefield. We're now in an era where we have to deal with contested logistics. We know in Iraq and Afghanistan, we lost one soldier for every 24 convoys supplying fuel and water to the front in those wars. We can't afford that anymore. As we green our supply lines and we improve energy supportability and reduce our demand, we will be a more efficient fighting force and therefore be able to provide better deterrence and defense for our societies and enable future peace and security. And that's what our young people are demanding. That's why I'm very pleased that we had Katerina is a young NATO young leader. We have other youth. The youth that I work with, that many of you all work with all the time, are demanding of us greater action on environmental security and environmental peace building, and we owe it to the next generation.
Minister Baerbock, I know you have to leave in just a few minutes, but I want to get a sense from you, if you will, when we talk about energy security, climate security, and frankly, national defense or collective defense in this case, I think we can all understand at this point why it's so interconnected, that it's pretty much talking about the same thing. Take a step back. I asked you a bit about OPEC. Yesterday, we heard some off-mic sound coming from President Macron. He was speaking to Joe Biden, essentially asking him whether or not he'd heard this comment from Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince, or rather now president of the UAE, that they had reached capacity. And when I speak to my sources in the GCC, essentially, they're already failing to meet the targets that they'd set simply because the capacity, it's not that it's not there, but they haven't reached it yet, because as we all know with oil and gas, you just can't turn the tap on and expect the product to be there. There is some work that goes into getting it to market. Are you concerned that we're going to see continued times of higher oil prices in the coming months? And I'm talking about $120 a barrel, because certainly that has implications for the electorate, for whether or not people are going to be on board for supporting governments, the NATO alliance, in its fight against Vladimir Putin and defense of Europe.
Yes, it can be. And I mean, we are faced now in Germany with the question if there's no gas coming through Nord Stream 1. I mean, we are discussing, my colleague Robert Habeck, Minister for Economy and Climate, he has announced our second alarm step. The third one would be that we have to decide which institution or actor in society can be cut off the grid. I mean, we are in a time of war. Ukraine is in a time of war, that people are dying, but we are in a hybrid war where the war is also being done by energy. But I mean, the question is, so what would be the opposite? I mean, first of all, we cannot change it in a way because we are trying to do everything to end this war. But as this war is going to continue, as I said before, we won't take back any form of sanction or anything like this, because then Mr. Putin wins, and this is nothing, this is no option. So this is why we have to stay tough, we have to prepare for everything, and this is why we have to think out of the box. And I mean, we have seen in the last weeks and also months that things are suddenly possible which haven't been possible before. I know my country obviously the best. We have been discussing for planning for new windmills. It took in the past 7 years. If you have a political will of saying energy and renewable energy is a question of security now, I mean, you have the possibility to change regulation quite fast with the parliament, obviously, but I mean, we have to use this momentum. We have to make things possible which we haven't done in the past without getting stuck in the next crisis. And I think this is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is that we are thinking in old boxes and thinking the only way out is another form of fossil energy. And then we are stuck in a couple of years realizing that this doesn't help at all. So we have to do it now on 2 tracks together. This is why when we are asking other countries for support with liquefied gas, we are not saying, okay, we are going only into liquefied gas. What I said before, we are building the infrastructure that in a couple of years, this is only green hydrogen coming through this. This is why we are also looking at climate partnerships with other countries with renewable energy. We are not going to the OPEC countries and saying, where's the fossil energy? We are going to the countries saying, where's the renewable energy? And I think this is...
But you are talking to Qatar.
Yes, with regard to gas, as what I said, as a bridge, and telling them this hydrogen has to be green in a couple of years. And I mean, this is realpolitik. Yeah, you have to think for the next weeks and months and then combine it with a plan for the next years coming up. And I would like to, sorry that I think the two of us always coming back to NATO at this, because we are NATO meeting, because I think we shouldn't think about it as like crises far above. Yeah, in my hometown, there have been like fires in the woods the last days for days again, and we have 130 fires already, even though it's not summer yet. And this is not Spain. This is Eastern Germany, and the same for NATO. The climate crisis and the danger that we have actually a war because of climate. Yes, this is something for countries where we are talking about Israel and others, where you can also use it as a peace solution. Mm-hmm. But if we are looking for Greece and Turkey, for example, if we are looking at countries within our NATO alliance, we also have to face that we are having a water problem in a couple of months. If we're looking, as our friend and colleague said, at the polar, the melting ice, this is also a security question. If the ice is melting, we have new conflicts in this area. So climate crisis is not only a question for conflict in other regions far above, it's also a NATO question, and this is why we also have to prepare these kind of things within NATO, and that's why it's so important that also this part is into the new strategic concept.
If I could just build on what she said again. What windmills so important, and other infrastructure to address the climate crisis. But governments can't do this alone. That's the key. We can't enact the legislation and expect miraculously for industry to turn and automatically produce what we need. We need to bring industry with us, and we need to ensure that they see themselves as part of the solution. Just like when we speak with industry relating to the provision of military aid to Ukraine. This is not something we can do without industry. Industry has to step up and produce the military aid, the drones, the ammunition, the continued equipment that we're providing to Ukraine. Similarly, in the environmental context, we need to ensure that they see themselves as part of the equation and the solution. And how do you do that? They have to be involved right now in the conversation relating to the solutions going forward on climate, or we won't be able to solve this crisis nationally or internationally.
Yes. During the pandemic, we were mankind was able to work together, private-public associations, to produce vaccines in a matter of months, and to vaccinate and to give a solution. Of course, we still have some COVID going on, but the majority of the countries are safe now. We can do the same in the energy sector. We just need to be investing, working in public-private alliances, and understand that the more we keep on consuming fossil fuels, the more we are financing the Russian aggression on Ukraine. So it's a matter of coherence that we need to keep in mind.
Before I close it out, I just want to get your sense, each of you, quite briefly, on the panel question that we had asked earlier in the day. In 10 years, the main security challenge facing the NATO alliance will be climate change, Russia, China, or something altogether different. Anita, if you'd like to kick it off.
Well, I think it's important that we don't isolate different types of risk. Rather, we need to see risk as interrelated. So what that means is we can't separate military from climate, from food, and other types of risks. They're actually all interrelated. And so this is one of your question is a little misleading if you look at it that way. I think we need to actually have a full-fledged, interrelated conception of risk at an international level, including at NATO, so that when we think about food crises, when we think about military crises, when we think about environmental crises, we're actually doing it under one umbrella as opposed to separate silos. Separate silos are dangerous in terms of planning for the future. This is all interrelated, and countries need to, I think, cooperate to address it together.
Minister Baerbock.
Well, I totally agree that these are all challenges we are facing. This is why in this concept we are addressing China, we are addressing obviously Russia and the climate crisis. But because I believe that politics can make a difference, if I have to pick, I would choose climate crisis, because, I mean, this is a difficult thing. With Russia, also with China, yeah, it's humans we, in the end, hopefully, we can deal with. But with the climate crisis, and this is why we cannot say we stop the climate crisis, we are already on the path towards 3 or 4 degrees. If we are doing the best, and this is what we are working on for the next years, then we will be below 2 degrees. But still, also then, we are facing the effects. And this is why it's not only about mitigation, it's all about adaptation and also about loss and damage for those regions we cannot save. There are islands we won't be able to save. And therefore, this climate topic will unfortunately stay forever, but we can make the difference between 4 degrees and 1.5.
Minister Bell.
Yes. Today's or the current NATO concept has a 360 degrees approach, which means that everything is comprised, all areas, geographical areas, but also all ideas, the nuclear, the geographical threats, energy, migration as a hybrid threat, etc. What is the real threat is underdevelopment. Underdevelopment and climate change are very interrelated, and this is a threat that people are displaced, that people are prone to terrorist attacks and to terrorist recruitment. So all combined is what we are facing. So underdevelopment is what we really need to tackle.
Sherry?
Well, thank you. You know, I've seen in my lifetime that our national security risks have converged with our environmental and climate risks. Starting out, you know, in the Cold War, and actually my first job was at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and during the Cold War, and so much has changed during this time, but the convergence of climate and environmental risks, along with food and water security, are now very intimately connected with the full scope of security challenges that NATO faces. And that's why I think it's so important that NATO has put this forefront in its strategic concept, that it's held this forum today, because that's how we're going to secure a better future for our generation and for future generations, which is by understanding how those climate and environmental risks integrate across all dimensions of risk, and so that we can better protect either by making more resilient, and I think NATO has led and will continue to lead on that way, make more resilient our societies and our military, and also lead us through the tough challenges we face now, both with aggression, but with the energy transition, and show the way how even in tough times we are able to make that energy transition lead us to a more secure future.
Panelists, thank you so much. We actually made it to time. Congratulations on a great conversation.
Thank you.
Which we managed.
Thank you.
If you could please take your seats for the final session. Thank you so much, Hadley, for chairing a succession of very interesting conversations this afternoon. That was brilliant. And let me also thank our speakers in the last session, who I think were extremely successful in bringing together, as Sherry Goodman mentioned, the fact that these phenomena have been converging over time: climate change, the weaponization of energy, and food security. So thank you very much to you and to our speakers for bringing this home to us so clearly. So we're going to wrap up today's proceedings with a special address by Ambassador Christoph Heusgen, who is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference. He was appointed back in February of this year, I believe, and it's a great honor and a pleasure to have him with us for this final session. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have just witnessed before here a new kind of forum with Mr. Barker and myself, the man being the decoration, and I have 5 female speakers on the podium. So a very special event. But I would like to thank our co-hosts today, of course NATO, but also Elcano and the Elcano Royal Institute, GMF, and Atlantic Council. It's really a pleasure to do this together. What I would like to highlight at the beginning is first the very fact that we do this public forum. When you probably all listened to the different speeches a bit earlier, there was one remark that Foreign Minister Baerbock made when she said that we are losing our narrative. We are losing our narrative when it comes to many countries in the global south. When you talk to them about the food crisis, the prices going up in food and energy, and then they believe, as Russia and China even tell them, well, this is due to the fact that the NATO countries, the West, is putting sanctions on Russia. And when you go around, you hear this a lot. And what is very important, and this is why I believe the public forum and fora like this are so important, we have to be better to make clear what the truth is. And the truth is that is because of Putin's brutal aggression, his brutal war against Ukraine, his breach of civilization, that the world is suffering, that we are witnessing this increase in food prices, the lack of food, and the low and the high energy prices. And I think we need public fora like this one. We have to be much better, and we must also not limit ourselves to talk to ourselves. We are doing this here a bit. We have to reach out. We have to reach out to Africa, to Asia, to Latin America, to make the point across. It was 141 nations, yes, who supported the condemnation of Russia after its invasion in Ukraine. But when you look at the follow-up, when you look at other votes on the exclusion of Russia from the Human Rights Council, we were less than half of the countries in it. So we have a big tall task in front of us, and I think public fora like this are very, very important. Now, this forum here was about the climate crisis, climate and security. And here in Spain, and probably all of you who came to Spain and walking out of the airport and walking here felt the heat. And actually in Spain we have last month the highest temperature in a long time in Spain. Patricia Espinosa, the executive secretary of the UNFCCC at the UN Climate Change Conference in Bonn a couple of weeks before, said that we are on track to more than double the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. So this is really a crisis that we are facing. And of course, we all are concentrating on Ukraine and on Russia's aggression, but at the same time, we know and we have the pulse that all people are, of course, concerned about Ukraine, but they continue to be very concerned about climate change. Our data from the Munich Security Conference Special G7 edition showed, the security index shows that war in Ukraine has not overshadowed the threat of climate change. People in G7 countries are still as concerned about climate change as last year, and climate change is seen as one of the gravest threats to the security of the G7 population. And I think this holds true well beyond. So I would like to also thank the Secretary General Stoltenberg, for putting climate change again high on the agenda. We had last year in 2021 at the summit the adoption of the NATO Climate Change and Security Action Plan. And we are spending a significant part of this public forum today and tomorrow dedicated to climate security. I followed the keynote speech by the Secretary General earlier on, and I was very much impressed by the fact that despite he's trying to get Erdogan to agree to Finland and Sweden, he's presenting his new project on the rapid reaction force, etc. But he was concentrating large part of his keynote speech on climate change, and I think it's very good that this organization has climate change very high on the agenda, as we have just heard before also by Sherry Goodman, who reminded us of the fact that the strategic concept has climate change in it. So what I think was very important that the Secretary General today set the emission reduction goals to NATO organization, and that he also announced a new initiative on facilitating energy transition in the military sector. Sherry Goodman said it very clear, saying that we need a green defense procurement, that also in the military, all the military vehicles, everything, that they are actually ahead in using renewable energy and green hydrogen and whatever sources we have. So from today's discussion, I took away that this relationship of climate and security is well ingrained in all what has been said. And I recall when I was representing Germany in the Security Council 2020, we put climate and security on the agenda of the Security Council. We wanted to adopt a resolution on this topic, and when actually we didn't put it on to a vote because at the time China, Russia in particular, but also the US under Trump administration said, well, there is no climate change, we will not adopt the agenda. When last year our friends from Niger put it to a vote in the Security Council, the resolution on climate and security, it was Russia that vetoed it. So it is again Russia that is the spoiler on something which I think everybody recognizes how important this is. Annalena Baerbock today said something very important, which I think, and said that renewable energy is part of our freedom and our dependence, and we feel this in my country right now, the dependence on fossil fuel make us very dependent on the aggressor, on Russia, and so our freedom is also then impacted by our dependence on fossil fuel. So we have to continue to keep this on the agenda. What I found also in the remarks by Ministers Anand and Bo, very important, the fact that climate is a threat multiplier, has consequences in a host of areas. The Spanish minister mentioned that underdevelopment, clear link to security, underdevelopment, clear link to climate change, food security, migration. Also, we see that the dynamics with our strategic competitors in the Arctic is driven by climate change, and we see a lot of instability. The Minister Baerbock mentioned Mali, where the fragile security situation is caused by climate change. So let me close by saying that I think that it is very important, despite the fact that, of course, Russia's aggression is looming everywhere, that we don't forget about climate change, that we continue on our way to meet the climate goal, that we implement the Paris Agreement, and we do this in all fora. This is what also the Spanish minister said, and this I want to end with, to remind everybody of the Sustainable Development Goals of SDG 17, which asked for the cooperation of all actors in reaching these goals. And this is what we have to do, and I think it's very good that NATO is part of it, and we are very happy as co-hosts that we're part of this discussion and we were able to put this wonderful panel together. So thank you all very much, and more to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those very pertinent concluding remarks. As a former Spanish Prime Minister likes to remind us at Elcano, NATO is a crucial international organization, but of course the populations of NATO countries only add up to 12% of the world's total, and we therefore have to think hard about how we engage with the rest of the world. So on that note, let me just thank the speakers, the moderators, and all of you for having attended today's sessions, and we all look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp. As you all know, Spaniards are extremely punctual, so don't disappoint us. Thank you.